A central truth of the Great Enrollpression: the threat is not just decline, it's inertia. It's the inability of rigid institutions to reforge themselves. Welcome to the Innovation Forge. In today's episode, we visit the Great Enrollpression through the Forge Bellows. Let's see how innovation meets artistry as we forge something extraordinary together.
You are listening to the Innovation Forge, the #1 podcast on adaptive enrollment management, exploring the data, marketing, and strategy that fuels higher education. Here's your host, David Dysart.
Hello, Guilders, and welcome to another episode of the Innovation Forge. I am your host, David Dysart, and I'm thrilled you're joining me on this journey into the innovative world of higher education and adaptive enrollment management. Chapter 1. The demographic cliff becomes reality. A forge cannot burn without ore. And yet, across the country, smiths are reaching into their bins and finding less material to heat, shape, and to transform. The raw inputs of our craft are diminishing. The long-dreaded demographic cliff has lost its sharp drop. It's now appearing more as a drawn-out slope, but the erosion is real and it is accelerating. This chapter confronts the foundational stress fracture of the modern enrollment ecosystem. A shrinking pipeline of traditional age students, compounded by regional imbalance and migration uncertainty. The ore is not only scarcer, it's shifting, relocating, and reforming. For institutions whose recruitment strategy depends on stable demographics, the mold is no longer viable. Across the articles in this chapter, you'll see how national data confirms a steady, unavoidable decline in high school graduates over the next 2 decades. Regional disparities create a patchwork of opportunity and collapse, with the South holding its seat while the Midwest begins to chill. Institutions with high tuition dependency and rigid recruitment molds are at elevated risk, not just of missing goals, but of a systematic failure. The demographic slide doesn't stop at the gates. Its impact echoes through labor markets, regional economies, and long-term sustainability models. Strategic resilience now means mastering smaller batches of ore, improving retention welds, and shaping new alloys altogether: adult learners, post-traditional students, and international flows. The furnace isn't going out, but it must be reconfigured. Welcome to Chapter 1, where we begin not with a spark, but with a slow cooling. The metal is changing, the temperature is falling, and the forge must adjust before it cracks. Let's keep forging. The molten silence, when the furnace runs cold. A long way down the demographic cliff. Publisher, Inside Higher Ed, Liam Knox. Check the show notes for the URL. When a forge cools too quickly, the metal within it seizes. It resists shaping. The same is true now for enrollment strategy as the demographic base itself, the raw ore of higher education, thins by the year. Inside Higher Ed's article presents a stark, data-backed reminder that the demographic downturn is no longer speculative, it's active. Nationally, we face a projected 13% decline in traditional age students by 2041. But the pain will not be felt evenly. The Northeast and Midwest are already showing signs of contraction, while parts of the South and West hold steadier for now. In artisan terms, the billet has shrunk. If our craft is student shaping, our inventory just got tighter. The issue is not only fewer students being born, but also migration patterns, immigration shifts, and regional movement that redraw the map of opportunity. A key tension emerges. Those who cling to the old tools and molds may find themselves forging into air. Institutions overly reliant on traditional pipelines risk hammering away at a vanishing shape. The furnace must be repositioned. The article focuses on operating and expecting lean times. From the forge, this calls for a multifaceted strike. Admission teams will need to temper their expectations and redesign their molds. That means tuning recruitment beyond geography, extending appeal to non-traditional and adult learners, and addressing population pockets that have long been underserved. It also demands thinking institutionally about consolidation, collaboration, and even contraction. terms not easily spoken in campus halls, but etched deeply in the new smithing manual. The demographic shift is not a collapse, it's a deformation, and like any metallurgic process, it demands we adapt our alloys. Blueprint breakdown. Map regional heat zones. Create a data map of enrollment potential by zip and county, not just state. Your strongest yields may no longer lie in your backyard. Model for scarcity, not growth. Run scenario plans based on declining cohorts. Build models not just for who can enroll, but who will remain in the pool over time. Reforge the pipeline. Invest in adult learners, certificate programs, transfer-friendly policies, and global reach. These are no longer fringe efforts. They are the new crucible. Audit institutional fragility. Examine financial and operational vulnerabilities through the lens of declining volume. How brittle is your enrollment furnace? Build migration-aware recruitment. Families and students are moving post-pandemic. Your best-fit applicants may now reside in entirely different feeder markets. This is one of the core forces driving the Great Enrollpression, the slow unmaking of a student population that higher education had once taken for granted. It's not just about fewer applicants, it's about what happens to the entire forge floor when the ore no longer arrives. The metal's changing, so must the maker. Let's keep forging. The drop forge years, bracing for the impact below. Article, as 2025's demographic cliff looms, how far will college enrollment fall? Publisher, Forbes. Michael T. Munsell. Check show notes for URL. In a forge, a drop hammer shapes metal through sheer impact. The blow is powerful, precise, and irreversible. In higher education, we are approaching our own drop forge moment, the enrollment cliff of 2025 and beyond. This isn't a momentary lapse in volume. It's a seismic, prolonged strike. Forbes' piece traces the arc of this projected decline with sharp clarity. Beginning in 2025, the number of high school graduates will shrink significantly, with a 15% drop expected through 2037. It's not just fewer students, it's fewer students everywhere, with more rapid declines hitting specific regions like the Northeast and Midwest. The article makes clear that while some highly selective institutions may weather the descent, most colleges are not so well insulated. Regional publics, smaller privates, and institutions already teetering on thin margins will bear the brunt. The tuition model that once worked will now be working against them. What the article implies but doesn't fully forge through is the ripple effect beyond enrollment headcount. The decline reshapes staffing models, pricing strategy, program offerings, and capital investments. This deal isn't just softer, it's thinning, fracturing, and decarbonizing. At the Innovation Forge, we view this not just as a challenge of numbers, but of metallurgy. The formula that once bonded volume to sustainability must now be reformulated. Institutions must work with new alloys like adult learners, global pathways, stackable credentials, and harden them through intentional design and data-infused planning. This is no longer about recruitment boosts. It's about a structural refit. The cliff is real, the impact is generational, but a skilled blacksmith does not fear the drop hammer. They align the piece to land correctly. Blueprint breakdown. Differentiate by design, not by default. In an era of shrinking demand, sameness is fatal. Schools must carve a distinct value narrative and reinforce it at every stage of the funnel. Score fragility before the fall. Run institutional simulations. Where does financial viability break when enrollment dips? 5, 10, or 15%? Build your melt models now. Rethink yield as retention from day one. The cliff doesn't stop at the admit. Shrinking cohorts mean every yield point, melt touch, and advising nudge must be measured and reinforced. Make the case to the non-traditional. If your marketing, financial aid, and academic calendars are still shaped solely for 18-year-old fresh out of high school, your mold is misaligned. Forge alliances, not just pipelines. Regional enrollment packs, shared services, and dual-degree collaboration may offer the strength that individual institutions can no longer sustain alone. This article joins the growing chorus clarifying the stakes of the Great Enrollpression. It is not simply fewer applications, it is a prolonged structural pressure on the foundation of higher education, reminiscent of broader economic downturns. The forge must now endure harder blows, longer burns, and less raw material. Those who recalibrate with precision and courage may not only survive the impact but forge a new shape from it. Let's keep forging. Stronger welds. Forging from within during the Great Enrollpression. Article. You can't create 18-year-olds. What can colleges do amid demographic upheaval? Publisher. Higher Ed Dive. Ben Unglesby. Check the show notes for the URL. In times of demographic contraction, some institutions try to patch their armor. Others learn to reinforce the core. Higher Ed Dive's article presents not just a warning bell, but a blueprint for internal fortification. The demographic cliff, steep in some states, jagged in others, is often framed around declining high school graduates. But this piece shifts the lens. Instead of focusing only on where students are disappearing, it asks how campuses can do better and serve the students they do enroll. Retention, it argues, is no longer a back-end concern. It's the main forge. Investing in student belonging, rethinking instructional formats, and attending to underserved populations becomes essential alloy in this era. The article pulls in Ritchie data, census shifts, and recent closures trends to support a strategic posture shift. Schools must work harder to keep the heat they already have. This is where the artisan lens becomes useful. In metallurgy, a clean weld is stronger than the original material, but it only forms when two parts are heated properly, joined evenly, and held under the right pressure. That's what retention now represents, not an afterthought, but the seam that holds enrollment strategy together. The piece also calls attention to compositional shift. The new student body will be older, more diverse, and more mobile. If your enrollment strategy is calibrated to yesterday's student profile, you're tempering with the wrong blueprint. At the Forge, we argue that these are not obstacles, but new metals. They require updated hammers, new cooling practices, and a mindset that builds for durability, not just polish. Blueprint breakdown. Shift the load bearing to retention. Retention work should not begin post-enrollment. Build multi-year models that fuse retention, advising, engagement, and aid into your forecasting from day one. Forge cultural belonging into the experience. From orientation through faculty engagement, belonging is not a side offering, it's a core to persistence. Audit which populations feel peripheral and redraw the hearth around them. Broaden the input material. Expand beyond 18-year-old high school grads. Embrace adult learners, returners, and those with stop-out histories. Build pathways, not just pipelines. Redesign for modularity. Stackable credentials, shorter time to degree formats, and evening/weekend access are essential tools. Flexibility is now a survival trait. Invest in the retention team as mastersmiths. The staff responsible for student support must be seen as strategic engineers, not just service providers. Build them into your enrollment design process early. This article drives straight into the heart of the Great Enrollpression. It reminds us that solving for headcount alone is like adding flux without heat. Structural decline demands structural solution. Forge the inside, not just the surface. There is strength in what you already hold, if you hold it well. Let's keep forging. Echoes from the Anvil. Article. Penn State trustees vote to close 7 branch campuses amid declining enrollments. Publisher. AP. Mark Levy. Check the show notes for the URL. In a forge, each hammer strike carries heat, force, and consequence. But sometimes the loudest impact is not the blow itself, but the ring that follows. The reverberation through the structure. AP's piece on the demographic cliff captures this secondary shockwave. At first glance, declining college enrollment may seem like an internal crisis for higher education. Shrinking applicant pools, budget shortfalls, and empty residence halls are problems that weigh heavily on admission offices and provosts. But as Penn State closes smaller and likely more rural campuses, the drop in students doesn't stop at campus gates. Fewer students entering higher ed today means fewer trained workers tomorrow. The sectors already in short supply, like nursing, teaching, and information technology, are the same ones most reliant on degrees. The demographic cliff becomes an economic cliff. The Great Enrollpression isn't just about institutions under pressure, it's about national capacity thinning out. When a school closes, it's not just a campus lost, it's a local employer, a hub for the community life, and often the most consistent source of professional labor in the area. As student populations drop, these institutions move closer to insolvency, taking the towns around them with them, oftentimes unconsulted and uninformed by the institutions that are so pivotal in their communities. This is where enrollment strategy meets public policy. What's needed is not just better marketing or new programs. It's a national reckoning on how education fuels the workforce. In Forge terms, we are depleting the coal that powers the furnace, even as we ask for more output. At the Innovation Forge, we believe that this is the moment to align institutional health with economic foresight. Enrollment models cannot be siloed from labor needs. Forecasts must consider not just who will enroll, but what happens when they don't. Blueprint breakdown. Embed labor market alignment into program planning. Programs that lack clear occupational pathways will face deeper declines. Tie program expansion to projected employment needs in your region and beyond. Engage state and local coalitions. Make the case for enrollment investment as economic development. Collaborate with workforce boards and government partners to reinforce shared outcomes. Track institutional risk for regional fallout. Assess the broader ecosystem impact if your institution or a nearby peer were to downsize or shutter. Use that data to inform community partnerships and fundraising. Model the downstream skills gap. Your enrollment data must forecast regional labor shortfalls. Start measuring not just enrollment, but future credentialed graduates by sector. Redefine value in your messaging. Articulate not just what students gain, but what communities lose without them. Shift from personal ROI to civic and workforce impact. This is the outer ring of the Great Enrollpression. Not just a thinning of student bodies, but a weakening of national infrastructure. What we enroll today determines what society builds tomorrow. These aren't just students. They are future welders, nurses, analysts, and architects. When the forge cools, the economy stiffens. Let's keep forging. The hairline fractures, precursor shocks to institutional collapse. Podcast, The Enrollment Cliff. Publisher, Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO with Jamie Hunt. Check the show notes for the URL. In blacksmithing, a hairline crack in the anvil is easy to miss. Until the next hammer strike splits it apart. Enrollify's podcast episode, The Enrollment Cliff, captures the quiet instability now spreading across higher education. The Enrollment Cliff, long a talking point among strategists and demographers, is now hardening into reality. But, as the episode points out, it's not just about numbers, it's about institutional mass and fragility. Too many colleges chasing too few students with financial models built for a world that no longer exists. The conversation explores the compounding pressures, shrinking high school graduation rates, increasing skepticism about the value of a degree, and the lack of flexibility in traditional campus structures. Many schools are carrying more fixed costs than their new reality can support. The result? A growing segment of institutions teetering on the edge of unsustainability. The hosts also discuss how marketing needs to be aligned with the role of higher education and how it serves in students' lives, tailoring to the uniqueness of the institution and adapting the new student body realities. CMOs need to be driving strategic conversations on these new realities, and that requires knowing what they are and being able to communicate them. The metaphor here is one of patching leaks while the hull rots. The true question is no longer how to boost headcount, it's how to rebuild the ship. At the Innovation Forge, we see this moment as a call for a deep re-engineering. The age of cosmetic optimization is over. Adaptive enrollment management requires a foundational rework. Pricing reform, academic program audits, predictive infrastructure, and a full overhaul of how campuses define value. Sustainability now means more than surviving the next cycle. It means forging a lighter, stronger model that can bend with the shifts ahead. Blueprint breakdown. Audit fixed cost exposure. Assess how much of your operational structure assumes consistent or growing enrollment. Build scenarios around right-sizing without collapsing. Refactor enrollment strategy as institutional strategy. Enrollment can no longer be siloed. It must sit at the table with finance, academic planning, and workforce development. Retire ineffective programmatic offerings. Programs that no longer drive enrollment or outcomes must be phased out to free resources. This is a strategic furnace, not a sentimental archive. Build confidence and value. The value proposition of higher ed needs to be reshaped in messaging and in substance. Rethink your curriculum, outcome data, and student experience through a lens of public trust. Train for adaptability, not just capacity. Your teams, systems, and models must flex quickly. Build infrastructure that can pivot when demographics, legislation, or economic conditions shift. This podcast reinforces a central truth of the Great Enrollpression. The threat is not just decline, it's inertia. It's the inability of rigid institutions to reforge themselves when the mold is cracked. This is not about bouncing back, it's about rebuilding. If the foundation gives way, the fire goes with it. Let's keep forging. The Cold Forge Test, Enrollment Craft in a Time of Scarcity. A seasoned smith knows that not every challenge comes with sparks and flame. Sometimes the real test is what you can shape when the heat recedes and the ore runs low. The demographic descent is not a single blow. It's a sustained strain that is slow, structural, and unrelenting. Across the articles in this chapter, we've seen how declining high school graduation rates, regional population shifts, and uneven enrollment demands are changing the very materials we work with. The billet is smaller, the furnace is cooler, and the forging window is narrower. This is not the end of the craft. It is the beginning of a new discipline. In blacksmithing, when the metal won't yield to brute force, the answer is not harder strikes, it's smarter ones. Adjusting alloys, controlling temperature, designing with efficiency instead of excess. This chapter's lesson is clear. Higher education must shift from mass production to master craftsmanship. We must temper our tools, refine our recruitment molds, and rethink the institutional structures that assumed growth as a given. Blueprint breakdown. Build heat maps by microregion. Move beyond state-level strategy. Use zip-level analysis to find localized zones of potential and stress. Refocus on retention as raw material. With fewer new students entering the forge, the students you already have are your primary alloy. Retention isn't just support, it's supply. Recruit for mobility, not proximity. Target students based on migratory patterns and post-pandemic movement. Feeder markets are not where they used to be. Widen the input stream. Design programs and pathways that serve adult learners, transfers, and credential seekers. The traditional high school to college path is no longer dominant. Forge with scarcity in mind. Audit every piece of your enrollment operation for dependency on high-volume inputs. Build strategies that function under constrained conditions, not just abundant ones. The first phase of the Great Enrollpression is not collapse. It's contraction. A constriction of the pipeline. A tightening of the mold. What we forge next must be lighter, stronger, and more responsive to the materials we actually have, not the ones we wish we had. The metal has changed. The fire must follow. Let's keep forging. If you enjoyed today's episode, please grow the guild by rating and reviewing the Innovation Forge podcast or sharing it with a colleague who needs to hear about these creative crossovers in education. The best review or comment every month will get an ebook of my book, of course. Particularly great ones will also be featured on future episodes. Thank you so much for joining me in the workshop today. Remember to strike true, and let's forge something extraordinary together.
In the east, the kilns go cold. The snow falls thick on the mold. Smiths once called with bellows wide, now count the coals, the flame denied. Southward still the fire holds true, but shifts its path away from you. The ore has legs, it moves unseen, unarmored vein through friction means. The ore runs thin, the sparks fall low. We used to strike, now we must know. Shape not with heat, but sharper eye, and forge what's left before we die. The ore runs thin, but the fire sings still. The ore runs thin, but the fire sings still. Midwest cracks like tempered steel, enrollment brittle, yield unreal. West winds scatter forge-born youth, north retreats from forged truths. What if the flame was never ours? What if the mold must learn new powers? Adult hands, foreign heat, the billet bends when pressure meets. The ore runs thin, the sparks follow. We used to strike, now we must know. Shape not with heat, but sharper eye, and forge what's left before we die. The ore runs thin, but the fire sings still. The ore runs thin, but the fire sings still. Not every forge fails when the ore runs out. Some learn to shape the wind instead.